Thank you all for joining us today for the Women in Construction Speaker Series. My name is Celia Polman. I am a mechanical engineer with Thompson Consulting Engineers, and we've been doing this event for just over a year now, which is awesome. Um, in the past, we've focused a lot on everybody's personal experiences in the field and overcoming obstacles and their advice for other, especially women in the construction industry. And we are going to continue with that, but also kind of shift our focus into a more technical direction moving forward, really focusing on skill building and making progress in your development of different soft skills and technical skills that will help you be more successful in your careers. And today, part of that is with Sydney Covey. She is going to talk to us a lot about LEAD. I'll give her a little bit of an introduction first. She is a senior manager in energy and sustainability at STRUCTR Advisors, and her passion for environmental stewardship benefits her clients throughout every stage of a building's development and life cycle, resulting in a steadfast champion to usher forth sustainable building and human wellness. Sydney's breadth of experience includes involvement in the Brock Environmental Center, which is a LEED Platinum and Living Building Challenge certified facility. With her certification, experience in LEED, LBC, WELL, Green Globes, Earthcraft, and ParkSmart, Sydney has helped to certify over 4 million square feet of sustainable building space across Virginia. She is the vice president of the board of the Chesapeake Bay Governor's School for Marine and Environmental Sciences Education Foundation. Sydney serves on the board of directors for Virginia PACE Authority and has also been a guest lecturer at 9 different Virginia higher education institutions, which includes Old Dominion University, Virginia Tech, and the College of William and Mary. So we're really excited to have her here with us today. Sydney was also named to the 2022 Green Biz 30 Under 30 list, and most recently named to the Covey Biz Magazine Next Gen 2024 list and the Virginia Business 100 People to Meet in 2025. So she is definitely an exciting person to talk to, and we are very happy to have her here. Thank you so much for joining us, Sydney.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited to be here today and to chat.
Is there anything in your little introduction that you'd like to add that I maybe missed out before we get started?
Not that I can think of. I think we'll hit it in the conversation.
Awesome, perfect. So for everybody listening, as we discuss the topics, if you've got any questions, feel free to add that into the chat. That's open. There's also a Q&A function that's set up for this meeting, so you can just type it in there and we'll notice your chats and add those questions in as we go along. Also, near the end of our session, maybe around like 12:45 or so, we'll open it up to the audience. And if you feel comfortable unmuting yourself, even turning on your camera if you'd like, and asking some questions for Sydney directly, you can do that. Otherwise, feel free to keep using the chat function. I know sometimes it's a little more comfortable to type out your questions than speak them. But whatever you're comfortable with, we want to get those questions answered. So, jumping right in. Sydney, tell us a little bit about yourself, your interests, what drew you to your field of work.
Yeah, sure. So I have a little bit of a unique kind of connection to how I got drawn to the field. So I grew up in Matthews County, which is a small rural town, coastal rural town in Virginia on the Middle Peninsula. If it's not even a one stoplight town because there were no stoplights. We lived on the Chesapeake Bay. I lived, and played there. And I experienced, pretty impactful hurricanes and coastal flooding. So it was the very, early on in my childhood when I experienced Hurricane Isabel, and I really was like impacted by like, this is the force of Mother Nature. We have to figure out how to live with her. And I really got to understand her strength. And then as I was growing up in school, I went to the Chesapeake Bay Governor's School, Marine and Environmental Science, where I got deeply immersed in hands-on education around the Chesapeake Bay and all it has to offer. And that was kind of when I really started to think about, okay, maybe I want to, have a deeper connection to the environment from a career perspective. At that same time, I set my big, hairy, audacious goal for myself, which is to ensure that my great-great-great-grandchildren get to see polar bears in Alaska and experience them and not learn about them in history books. And when I set that, My mom says I was probably younger, probably 8th grade or 9th grade. I definitely remember at 10th and 11th being a guiding compass about wanting to really lean in on generational impact. And so when I set out to school at Virginia Wesleyan, it was college then, now university, I was really trying to figure that out. And so I decided to get a degree in business environmental studies because I felt like then I thought there were only two sides to every argument when it comes to sustainability. I now know there are several other perspectives and sides to the argument. But I figured I could at least have a solid foundation in, environmental side and being able to really convey those ecosystem services. But then I also thought, well, maybe I need to understand the business case and why this would make financial sense or not, and kind of what that looks like through the lens of a business. And then I actually was looking for my first internship right out of school for my program, for my business degree. We needed a 40-hour-a-week internship our last year. And just at that same time, my faculty advisor, Bruce Vaughn at Virginia Wesleyan, was also the vice president of facilities. Virginia Wesleyan was going through their master campus overhaul, and they were doing their master planning for the campus. And Bruce Vaughn said, you should probably go talk to Horgan Construction. They're leading the effort from a costing and a constructability review perspective. They're also building one of the most sustainable buildings in the world right down the street, the Brock Environmental Center. Maybe they need a sustainability intern to help them with that. And so I went to the Horgan office and met with the executive vice president at the time, Chris Brandt, and he was like, yeah, we could definitely use a sustainability intern. And that was kind of the start of my career. And it finally clicked for me that buildings are going to be here for hundreds of years if we've done something right. And we are going to experience them. And that was when I figured out that generations over generations will experience the buildings. And we take a very strong role and responsibility in ensuring our impact thinks about it through the lens of those generations that will experience, live, work, and play in those buildings. And that was kind of the click of the aha for me from my polar bears in 8th and 9th grade to my career now. And so, kind of ever since then, I've been hooked. And I went from being an intern with the team at Horgan, and then 8 years ago, Mark decided that he wanted to start STRUCTR Advisors as a completely independent full-service consulting house, and he asked me to come over and lead sustainability full-time. So I made that transition going on 8 years ago, but I've been with Mr. Horgan my entire career for 10 years. So.
Wow, awesome. Yeah, and here we are now, and
right, exactly.
making that impact for the future generations. Yeah, because you're right. The built environment is really our biggest impact that we can have on a personal level, since we do impact the choices that are made and how a building impacts the world around it. And like you said, they're standing hopefully for hundreds of years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you think about all the buildings you walk in today, like somebody designed it, somebody thought about that design, somebody thought about the engineering and how you experience that space. And so if we have any ability to better that and better position our future, we should take that as the AEC professionals, right? Otherwise, who else is looking out for those generations? So
right, and I think that generational impact is a little bit harder to see in the United States, maybe, but when you go to like European countries or something that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years more than we have here, you really see like, oh, these buildings stay.
Yeah, they're here for a long time.
Yeah. So now that you're at STRUCTR Advisors, can you give like a quick background on your day-to-day work? What kind of stuff you do? Who are you working with? Kind of just what is your overarching goal in your work and your day?
Yeah, so my day-to-day looks different, but that's a function of the fact that we work with owners and architects and contractors and subcontractors and manufacturers. So because our consulting services are diverse and unique, we're not just attached to construction, we're not just attached to architecture, even just owners. Sometimes my days are fighting owners about adding EV charging stations because it's a law, or then I go into a conversation with a mechanical sub who's struggling to get his lead submittals together and trying to figure out how do we help them package that and put their best foot forward for the submittal review cycle, to, you know, talking with architects about how do I keep them in the inside of what I call the sustainability guardrails and help them understand how the design doesn't have to be compromised when pursuing, you know, sustainability and certifications. So sometimes I'm in all day design charrettes where we're trying to figure out those design strategies. And then other days I'm, you know, arguing with a subcontractor because I'm missing, you know, the last piece of documentation that's holding me up from certification, you know, like it just all kind of depends. And frankly, I love that because what's unique about having a diverse portfolio of client types is that I get to hear and see and feel sustainability from all angles of the market. So I'm not just looking at it through the lens of an owner, or through the lens of an architect even, but I get to see it from the contractor side. I get to see it from even the sub and the trade side, and in the field, and you know, hearing what manufacturers are saying, you know, across why is this hard? How is it, you know, how is it impacting us, to, you know, everything in between. So I find it like, you know, unique. I hear it from all angles and all sides sometimes, which is really, it's a blessing and a curse, but mostly a blessing.
Yeah. You're trying to weigh all of that different input and
because
make
I'm like
somehow agree.
Yeah, because I've got owners, or I mean, I have you know, trade partners who are like, oh, you know, sustainability is going to go away, and then I have owners who are investing millions and millions in. I'm like, oh, I don't necessarily agree with you there, Captain, but okay, you say so. Yeah.
And now in the introduction I gave, you've got a whole host of different like certification styles that you're familiar with and different situations. What kind of certifications do you see most commonly in our industry?
Yeah, I call that long list to my marketing team the alphabet soup because it's just a lot of letters put together. But yeah, so I mean, I've always, you know, seen LEED as the you know, most common. USGBC and LEED did a great job of positioning LEED as the market leader in sustainable third-party certifications, and so that I think has always been a kind of underlying the, like, when you think about sustainability building certifications, LEED is most always the first thing to come to mind. We've seen obviously a lot of LEED work, but we've also more recently gotten more involved in the green globe space, and you know, part of that is because that's also, you know, a vessel for compliance with like the High Performing Building Act for Virginia. So it helps to have an alternative. And that's kind of what I tell my clients is I'm always like, there's so many different certifications. It's what flavor fits you best is kind of where we like to try to land. But LEED and green globes are most common, I would say. In the Hampton Roads region, we do see a lot of federal work, and so guiding principles compliance is like a LEED green globes light perspective, and it's more fitted for what happens in most federal, you know, institutions. The type of work that they're doing inside prevents them from being able to have windows, you know, it prevents them from, you know, being able to have access or you know, occupancy sensors and controls in a way that normal buildings would. And so it, instead of punishing them for that and making it harder for them to achieve certification, it tailors, you know, okay, what can be done within those bounds and how can we kind of meet and synergize. So,
still accomplish the goals without punishing you for your security that you have to
have. Or like, listen, I'll never forget when I was an intern, I was just starting out and we were working on a federal project, and they were like, we're putting bike racks out here. And I was like, why? Like, we're in the middle of, you know, whatever it was, Dam Neck or Ocean. I'm like, who's riding a bike to work?
Who's biking to there?
And I just had that like naive like comment. They're like, well, we need it for a lead point. And I was like, oh, this is not how this is supposed to work, you know? And that was right at kind of the start of that evolution of the guiding principles framework inside of the DoD and federal government. And so then it became, oh, you can actually certify through that lens, and it felt far more appropriate. So we weren't putting, I say that all the time, like, I'm not putting bike racks, you know, at a SEAL team building, like, you know, for no, you know, just for a lead point. Like, that's not where we go here.
That's refreshing to hear too, because I think a lot of people's frustration sometimes with LEED is like, okay, I'm doing this just for the point, but it's not actually going to be useful to the building occupants, or realistically, it's not actually helping our sustainability on site.
Yeah, we definitely hear that a lot. And especially like over the past, I would say 2 or 3 years, we've seen a lot of what I call certification fatigue, and people are
Hmm.
tired of having those conversations. And, we have clients who are even providing feedback on, different things that they haven't seen the ROI that they thought they were going to on the first couple of certifications. And, they're saying like, listen, like I'd rather spend our money, time, energy somewhere else and then come
Yeah.
back to this if we absolutely have to, but we're not seeing a benefit. So we're definitely having a lot more of those conversations and meeting people where they are in that
Hmm.
conversation
Hmm.
to help. But yeah, they're definitely feeling that. Why are we going through this
Yeah.
process?
Yeah, and I think a lot of times there's this overarching goal of being sustainable, right?
Yeah.
Without necessarily having a clear path to getting there or an idea of what that means, like in implementation.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so what do you do to kind of dig into that and really understand what are the actual needs of this building or owner?
Yeah, so typically what I try to do first out of the gate is like not talk about a specific certification type. I don't come in and say like we're going LEED, we're going Green Globes, like
Hmm.
unless, it's like 100% already like black and white, that's what we're doing and they know that. But even then I try to like challenge that, like, is this the right approach? Just because you've been doing it, or you've done it a couple of times, is it the right fit still? And I try to like just have the conversations about, well, what is important to you as the owner, as the operator? Like all of us on this project team are going to walk away except for you, who's going to own and operate and manage and experience this building for hopefully 100 years, right? So what does that mean? What does success look like through the lens of sustainability? And like, where can you also like not compromise? Like, we're got a
Hmm.
lot of projects where we have the conversations about showers and faucets and their flow rates, right? And some people like legitimately will not compromise on that. And it's like, okay, well, like these are things we should know like day one,
Yep.
because it might make other goals like less achievable. But really start to like have those conversations about the owner or with the owner and hear how the building is supposed to embody their sustainability goals. And they may have like very concrete, specific examples of like how this is going to work. And a lot of times you're like, I haven't thought about it through this lens. And like, your building is your outward identity of your brand, of your experience. This is what your customers, your clients, are seeing and feeling of your brand. There's
Hmm.
nothing more physical than your office or your hospital or your fire station, whatever it is. And you should take, some sort of conversation in your head about how does that translate to sustainability, right? How am I investing in my occupants, my employees? What do I want people to see when they come and experience my space? What does that say about us as a brand? And so kind of flip it and have those conversations about why. That helps us really boil down to say, like, actually, we do care about a plaque because people will see that when they walk in and they know that, right? We have
Yeah.
manufacturing clients who are like, our customers know what LEED is. And so if we have a LEED plaque on our building, they will associate our brand with something that, that they understand and they know. And so we fit better in their, in their book, right? When they go to
Hmm.
specify products, right? Or, we have some clients who are like, actually, it's not about the plaque, it's about performance. And we want to hit performance targets. We have, embodied carbon goals or emissions factors that we're trying to reduce. And like, we need to hit that because we're reporting to, a hedge fund, or we're reporting to somebody else who matters far more about that than they do having a cool plaque on the wall.
Yeah.
So we try to have those conversations. And then what happens is like, if I'm an owner and I happen to drive a Tesla and I want EV charging stations, as soon as we start to have this hard conversations about what gets VE'd out, that
Hmm.
owner feels that like that ability to say and be empowered to say like, no, actually, like I want this because I have an attachment to it. Not only am I a Tesla owner, but I want my employees to feel comfortable driving their EVs to work. I want my clients, my visitors to be able to charge their, cars while they're at work. And so it starts to add a little bit more of not just a conversation about requirements and expectations, but like I actually have a sense of ownership of the strategies. And then
Yeah.
they hold on a little bit more through the VE process.
More of an investment in what that
Yeah.
end product is. And
Yeah. And they're excited and, a little bit more passionate about it. And they're not just like, oh my God, we have to go through this process, or here we are talking about the lead stuff.
yeah.
You have clients who are like, I don't want to talk about it at OAC meeting. I know you're doing what you're doing. And the other clients are like, no, I want to know exactly how it's going. And it's those clients who like, oh yeah, we've been hanging on, and like they're not compromising on the sustainability side. Like they'll find the money elsewhere if they have to. But
Mm-hmm.
those are the refreshing clients for sure.
Oh, well, speaking of lead, because that, like you said, that's what you see a lot. That's what we as the design engineers have seen a lot of, and kind of like, oh, dragging through doing this. What should we know about the documentation requirements? There's a lot of procedures on a lead
Right.
project, and so if you could kind of explain a little bit about how that works and throughout.
Yes. So one thing that about the documentation requirements is like they are pretty black and white. And when a reviewer is looking at at documents, not only are they looking at them in a vacuum, but they're looking at them through one lens and one lens only for whatever credits they're
Mm-hmm.
assigned to look at. And the type of documentation is important because they are looking for very specific components and elements. And they don't have a 360 view of the project from its inception to where it is now, and they're only looking at what is given to them. And so some of the things about, I think just like documentation and like and procedures in general, number one, like you can never start too early in the process. I mean, as soon as you're locked in on the actual, if it's certification, you have a very clear framework, which is really nice. You know what, the end goal is and the target is. You can start documenting and figuring out from a workload perspective, how do we handle this? Who manages it? Do we need, when we're having conversations, we always say, do we need like an exhibit that's included in the plan set? Do we need a narrative? Do we need a model? Do we need a model report and analysis to accompany that? Can we achieve that with the same set of drawings? Do we need something different? Because sometimes all we really need is the narrative from, an expert like you that I could tell you, but I'm not the licensed professional that says like, yeah, I designed it this way for X, Y, and Z reason. I know it's designed this way for that reason, but somebody has to put that stamp on it. And that's what sometimes they're looking for. And other times they're just looking at it, through a modeling perspective, and they're looking to see like, did really the conversations come up about like the baseline and, ensuring that the baseline assumptions are as black and white as possible, and justifying right why it maybe or maybe not, as clear as defined in the baseline, and why we made certain assumptions or not in some cases. But so I think that sometimes it's like that's what we're looking for, but sometimes we get just a like a narrative that says, okay, this is exactly how we landed on our performance, and that's enough. And a lot of times it's like, no, actually I need the homework, and I need to be able to show the work and how you got there, because the reviewers just don't know, and like frankly they're not gonna take the time to make an assumption, because then they can't hold every project to the same standard, right? And so I think number one, like starting early on in that process to say like, how are we handling this? How are we going to look at this? What things can we start to do in our design process that will make our future selves happy that we did it like starting day one? How are we, if we make a decision about a model, the thickness of a wall, why did we make that decision? Even if it was, because we wanted to, like, maybe we should make a note of that because it's different than the normal baseline, right? As soon as we start to change things, that's when the reviewers get squirrely, and you get more questions, and then you have to fight in that vacuum of, well, this is why or this is why not. So sometimes just having those notes, because as projects can go for years, right, before we get to that process, and you're like, I don't know why I did this 2 years ago, or like, I don't know why Jim did that. Like wasn't in his brain, but like if we have a conversation and documents of why we made these assumptions, or we did this calculation, this is how we arrived at showing compliance, then there's an ability to say, okay, historically speaking, like we have this record, we can go back and say, yep, here's all of the expectations, here's all the requirements, here's how we got to compliance, here's how we saw it through our lens, and then let the reviewer do kind of their due diligence on the other side. And I think that kind of as you're going through the design process, constantly having those check-ins and those conversations about, are we still in alignment with our original targets? How often do we have those conversations? I think about when projects go wrong or when the lead conversation starts to become like onerous and heavy is when people aren't honest about, I don't feel like we can achieve this. It's those when we have those hard conversations day one of like, this, you guys are asking way too much, or actually, I don't think this is feasible at all. Like, based on the layout of the building, like, based on the types of, units that our owner is comfortable servicing, like whatever that is, like, we just can't go any further than this. And having those like honest, candid conversations to say like, yeah, like we're just not there, we just can't get there. So don't put 20 points in the yes category when really we're going to get 5, because it's just going to be a harder conversation at the end. Like, I'd much rather run with the hard conversations first and say like, okay, like if we can't get here, like this is as best as we can do and everybody's going to have to be okay with it. I think that makes for a successful process because it allows for that, like that trust. If I know if we do something and I'm like, see, I thought we had this like daylighting calculation and you say, no, actually we're not going to meet that. I'm like, oh, okay. Like I can set away versus like we get to the end of the design process. And I'm like,
and then we don't meet it.
We're hanging on to this credit. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean we weren't doing it? Like, and then it becomes, like, oh man, now we're short a point, or we like sacrificed, we thought we had enough points and now we've made different decisions down the road. And so I think that like being able to have those conversations very open and transparently, and sometimes, not even having that conversation with the owner in the room yet, but like having that conversation internal to the design team. And if it's the design build team, but having those candid conversations to say like, this is all we can give, at some point we're going to hit a feasibility limit and that's pretty much it. So I think that, that does come into play and like being like transparent and open about that, about that conversation and saying like, yeah, like we can meet this or like, actually we can't. And so some of the things that we try to do like early on is like, we ask those questions of the professionals, the design professionals to say like, do you think this is even possible? Like, just like hard yes or no. Like if it's a no, then it's a no, like we can't pull anything, we can't pull anything forward. It's never ever going to be feasible. Like we shouldn't even talk about it in that process. Right.
I think that goes along with kind of this other discussion that you and I have had about balancing like sometimes opposing desires on the different projects, right? And from a MEP perspective, a lot of times, I mean, our equipment is some of the biggest impacts on the energy use of the building. It just is the lighting and the HVAC. And so a lot of times huge credit expectations are put on the energy efficiency on our end, and we'll do the best that we can, right? But then sometimes, like you said, owners have certain systems that they're comfortable with, and so you're stuck with the efficiencies that can do, or the super efficient systems are expensive, and so they're usually the first thing to get VE'd out. But you're trying to like balance that, and similarly, like architectural designs, you're going to want to have like a wide open building, lots of glass. The high atriums. It helps also with like the credits for the connection to the outdoors, right? So there is that like importance and daylighting and all of that, but then at the same time, it makes energy efficiency harder. So how we balance those kind of needs is tricky. And
absolutely.
How do you lead on those discussions when there's that kind of internal conflict?
So I think one of like the first things, or like one of the things I like to do, especially when things are they feel like everything's scattering and everybody's kind of coming to the table with like their ground and they're holding very closely, their thing, whatever it is. If it's we want this system or we don't want that system, or maybe it is like, we have a 2-story atrium, like it's just going to be a monster to heat or cool, right? One of the things that I like to do is, and I'm a big proponent of like meeting people where they are, but like in this case, like allowing like active listening and active conversation to say like, why is it that we're here at this point? Like, what is it that you don't like about that system and you don't want to operate it? Or what is it about this atrium that matters so much to you? And then like trying to, once you at least understand where other people are coming from, it's like, okay, well, maybe we can meet somewhere in the middle, or we can compromise in a way that everybody's comfortable with. Maybe it's not the middle, but like maybe there is a way that we can compromise and balance it out. And maybe it's not that you know, we need a full 2-story atrium to heat and cool. But if it is, okay, well, what are we doing, you know, adjacent that we can, you know, we can do to mitigate the impacts? Or, you know, we're having conversations, especially with owners, about you know, first cost versus life cycle costs. Like, oh, maybe we do, maybe the conversation that they haven't talked about, but now they're willing to talk about, is that their funding source is a lot different on day one than it is on day, you know, 3,000, right? And they're worried about, how do we fund, you know, phase 2, or how do we fund operations? You know, when we're working with nonprofit clients, that's a really big thing. They've got a, you know, $20 million donation, right, on day one. They're like, we're going to spend it here. So because we don't know what we're going to get, you know, on day worth 4,000. We don't know if we're going to have money for this. You know, they always, nonprofits always tell me, like, donors, you know, they want to donate to the cool, shiny things. They don't want to donate to the, you know, filters or
day-to-day,
buckets, you know, the operation stuff. Right. So I think that it's important that you find common ground and synergies, like where you can. Yeah, there are some times when you have to have this hard conversation to say, well, if we don't achieve X, Y, or Z. And as long as everybody in the room can say, yeah, like we understand that, and we're transparent about that, back to that transparency part, it's like, okay, like if we have to lean in this direction, at least we're all comfortable because we know what the outcomes are. We're not still promising or guaranteeing, you know, we can get LEED platinum, you know, if we're not getting but 2 points in the energy category, you know, like, so I think that that's like really important, because at the end of the day, we all want the building and the owner to operate, you know, the building in a way that is, you know, sustainable, that is efficient, but we also like need them to be comfortable in that space. We need them to be, you know, involved in that conversation. And at the same time, like, you want to design something that, you know, you're proud of, that you can say, like, yeah, like we squeezed every bit of juice out of that lemon that we could, and that, you know, and we did achieve it, or we met their expectations, or we found a way. So I think some of that, like, partnering sessions and listening sessions to say, like, all right, let's start over. Let's have that conversation. Why are we talking about this system over that system? What is it that we like or don't like? How can we compromise? Is there a way that we can compromise? Can we beef up the glass type? You know, can we add, you know, automatic shading? Like, what else can we do here? And tackle those conversations, you know, head on, and, you know, be, you know, transparent about, like, my why, and also like what the impact is if we do or don't do that. So that we can think through, you know, feasibility, constructability, you know, practicality, all those things.
And then you made me think too, like, when the building's being operated, you know, at least personally, my goal is for the building to actually be efficient, right? Not just on paper it's efficient and our design is efficient, but it's operating efficiently. And a lot of times, if an owner isn't familiar with the type of system, then maybe they won't be operating it in an efficient way. And so that's also got to be part of the conversation. Like, what realistically is going to translate into operations?
Right. Yeah. And will they be comfortable with it? Will they understand, you know, that it is a different system, and is that okay?
Yep. Or do all the occupancy sensors get overridden and the lights are always on, you know, then
like, wait, we put daylight sensors in, so why is it, you know, brighter than New York City in here?
Man, so we had a whole bunch of information and that was awesome. Let me see okay, this kind of ties in because you were talking about a lot what makes a project successful and having those conversations, being honest up front. What do you see that commonly holds back a LEED project from being successful?
I think it often does come down to, unfortunately, cost, but in a way that, right, like, now we're not seeing like it's that LEED is expensive. It's now the conversation is, it's either I do LEED or I don't do X, Y, or Z, and the form and the function of the building starts to sacrifice, which is where I'm always like, it's not, it's important, but it's not as important as you're going to have to rebuild in 20 years, right? Yeah. Like, you know, getting it right the first time and building in, you know, what you need, and, you know, and a little bit extra is far more important at this stage than a plaque on the wall, right? And so when we start sacrificing form or functionality of the building, or compromise and say, like, okay, yeah, this is a system we want, but it's going to cost you 3 times as much to, you know, maintain it, right? Or, you know, we start to have those conversations, like, that's not the intention behind any rating system, but especially LEED. So
Mhm.
I think that's a strong component of like, we don't want to put everything on the table because we're afraid that it's going to get VE'd. It's not going to survive the VE process. And I'm like, listen, let's put it on there, and they'll just tell us no, right?
Right.
I'm like, let's shoot for the moon, and if we land on Earth, we're good.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
totally fine with that. So I also think that part of what holds project teams back is their ability to think outside of the box and approach
Mm.
achieving those strategies and those goals through a unique lens that like, oh, we have to use the exact same design. This guy is what got us there last time. I'll give you an example. We're working on a project at the Charlotte airport, their new aircraft recovery and firefighting facility, and we're talking about daylighting for a whole host of reasons, but mostly for restorative, and occupancy wellness for the firefighters who are basically living there 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
And obviously in the bunk rooms, we don't want to have a lot of they don't want daylight because they want to be able to sleep. But we've decided to inject solar tubes into all of the training rooms and upstairs on the second floor, anywhere that the fire department is going to let us, to provide more access to daylight. And we thought the fire department was going to be like, oh no, we're not adding solar tubes to like the building because they want darkness. And now they're like, well, if you put them in a bunk room, can't you just turn like a louver and it would shut them? Now they're thinking like,
Okay.
could we add more? And I'm like, okay, like we went for it, and like we're going the exact like direction we want to go. And we just said, well, this is the only way we're going to get increase the access to daylight based on the floor plate. There's just not, we don't want their dorms like closest to the curtain wall because we want them to be able to sleep at night, during the day, right?
Right.
But yeah, so we like kind of went for it, and I was like, you know what? Had we not had that conversation with them and just kind of pushed them to think a little bit more, we wouldn't have even, had that opportunity. It would just been like a big goose egg on the scorecard. And we would have had totally different conversations. So I think that's some of also what it like holds projects back is like their ability to just, go for it and be bold about asking and saying that this is, where we want to go. And like, here's the real reason why. It does help when clients have a big goal of sustainability and they're like, this supports that too, by the way, like, and add
Yeah.
those synergies. But yeah, so that's definitely, I think, part of what holds it back.
Yeah, we've got a related question in the chat. Kat Cox says, as you're mentioning costs, we are often told at the city, she works with the city of Norfolk, that a LEED project should not cost anything additional from a standard project. However, that has not been our experience. What are your thoughts on the cost of a LEED project versus a general project and how to keep costs low while maintaining sustainability requirements?
If I had a dime for every time I got this question, I could probably fund a new office building at the platinum level. So whenever I have this conversation, I always think about, well, what's your frame of reference for the original cost and the baseline cost of that construction project? If you were already planning a building that embodies good, solid design practices, that meets the energy code, you're not far off from a LEED certified space. Truthfully, you might have to do a couple of things you weren't planning on doing. Like commissioning is always one thing that nobody thinks about, but it's always just a direct add that candidly I don't have any control over. I wish I did. We have commissioning agents in house, and I still can't control the cost. Like it is what it is, right? And
Yeah.
and it has nothing to do with how much we design or don't build. Like commissioning is a service, right, that the owner has that they may not be thinking about when you go for certification. There's also just in general certification fees and the process and management of that process throughout design and construction, where you have to have somebody who's passionate about keeping everybody on their cues about what is required from a documentation perspective, making sure we're checking in and meeting deadlines and tracking all that on the documentation flow. So if you're not thinking through that lens from the get-go, then it's going to feel expensive, right? And if you're not thinking about, oh yeah, we're going to have to pay a fee over top of a premium for just professional services that you weren't including, it will feel expensive. But the building itself, especially with the way that, number one, like, and Celia, you can probably echo this, the energy code is doing a good job of catching up finally, right?
It really is, yes.
So when you have to include monitoring and measuring in a building just as baseline now, the baseline building supports a lot of sustainability strategies out of the gate. I can tell you my architecture partners are thinking through a lens of sustainability without the conversation of a plaque on the wall. They're thinking about the material selection. They're thinking about occupant comfort and well-being. They're thinking about how do we get daylight into the building, just because it makes sense. So the office building that you're, budgeting today is going to be more expensive than it was 10 or 15 years ago because it looks and feels differently, because architecturally and from an engineering perspective, design and engineering standards have risen because that's what occupants are wanting, right? The market has shifted in a way. So I think one of the things that you can do when you're trying to control cost and, how do you maintain the sustainability objectives, but also maintain cost, is finding those synergies where it makes sense for a lot of reasons, not just for the plaque on the wall or not just because of a certification standard, right? From a MEP perspective, that a lot of those things like trend in the right direction, right? You're saving energy, you're saving water. Yep. It's an easier system to manage when you're measuring things. You can control things. You can find deficiencies quicker. You know what you're doing. You have more control and access. When you add daylighting, you're reducing your lighting need, your lighting consumption. So there are so many of those things that are that provide synergies that oh yeah, when we add daylighting, it means we're adding windows, it means we're adding access to quality views, and we're adding access to nature, and that's going to increase our occupant well-being, our productivity. And so you start to build narratives around strategies that it's not just a sustainability conversation, and then it doesn't feel like you're investing in something just for the sustainability aspect. You're investing in it because it's the right thing to do for our employees, our comfort and well-being. I think that it really makes sense to embrace those synergies, where you can. And I think, I'm trying to think if there's anything else to add to that. But
I think it's almost more noticeable at a wider time scale view, right? Where you're, like you mentioned, you're lowering your lighting, you're reducing the size of your mechanical systems probably. So your energy usage in terms of a price per square foot for the owner every month is going to go down. But that's not something that you'll see right off the bat. You might not see it for the next couple years or something. And then you're like, oh, this building's operating more cost effectively for us.
Put them in a portfolio and watch them perform, with the other buildings in that portfolio. And you're like, oh, I noticed this one's definitely doing something differently. Right. And that again is back to that first cost versus life cycle cost conversation. And some people that first cost is what holds them back. And it's, and it's okay, so what do you want to do today that sets you up for the future, right? If we can't do everything today because we don't all have billions and billions of dollars to spend, right? What can we do today to ensure your transition to, a fossil-free building can happen in the next 20 or 30 years, if that's where you want to go. If you know you're going to have an all-electric fleet, how do we size an electrical system to service that so that you don't have to come back and do that? If you're thinking about solar on your roof, how do you beef up the structure for the roof and ensure you get a roof membrane that accepts solar and doesn't void your warranty on the roof, right? So how do you have those conversations about adaptability for the future investment in sustainability on day one if you can't do all of the things you want on that day one, but then you can make it feel less aggressive, on day 3000, right?
Yeah. And this kind of indirectly ties to something we talked about before too, where it's realistically, the most sustainable building is one that already is built.
Absolutely.
and we just improve it. Let's see. So also kind of talking about Kat says that's helpful. Thank you. Yes.
That was helpful. Sorry, I get that conversation a lot on costs, so I get better at answering it, but
I mean it's always a difficult thing to balance as well, because people have limited funds and limited resources, and there's only so much that you realistically can do.
I know that,
but you are correct that the energy codes are getting closer and closer to essentially matching the lead requirements anyways. And so it's almost a given that you're going to have to do a lot of those things that would be integrated in a lead project. So I would like to also ask you, what do you see as key areas for improvement from the design teams on lead projects?
I think in terms of areas of improvement, I think it's going back to thinking outside the box and really approaching every project with the lessons learned from previous projects, but not with those as the starting point to say, like, we've done this before, so this is going to work here. And I think really going outside of that, we know this works, so we're going to stick here and stay here. And I think really thinking, through the system holistically and not saying, well, MEP is like, they own that, they're fine, in a tube, right? And like what I do, to my curtain wall they'll figure it out, right? Like they'll keep it all, right? So I think like that deeper, like, understanding of the synergies that exist just within the rating system very intentionally. And there are a lot of synergies, like, because it's meant to be holistic in its design. I think understanding that every credit has an attachment to another credit, and there's another why. And so when you're having, conversations like, oh, this isn't feasible, like, does it also trickle down and impact others? Or does it make does it make it harder to achieve? Or when we say, no, we can't, like, is it a no, we can't because we don't want to, because we don't want to go through the effort, to think through that? Is it there really a limitation and there's like actual barrier to not being able to do that? Because it could potentially put more pressure on other, design partners to perform or to squeeze as much, juice as they can out. But yeah, I think that that's a really big one. I think like not being afraid of the actual like documentation process is probably another area. I mean, listen, like my job exists because people don't like to do the documentation side, and I love documents, and my team does too. We love a good like document review, and we love going into Lean Online and adding things and checking things off. I'm a serious task list master. Every single one of my projects has an active to-do list, and we're like, okay, this comes from the civil team, this comes from the architect. But I think like understanding that like you're putting, your design and your your engineering work, to somebody in a vacuum, and they're validating, for you in a way that can be publicly displayed, that like, we're not just the everyday engineer, we're not the everyday architect, like we are designing and building to standards, of high quality, of the highest quality and highest performing, and we're pushing every design, we can across that threshold. So, and I think that's, I think that's also something where I'm like, you guys can do so much more than, if you just think it through. You guys are doing amazing work, and I'm always amazed at my partners, who I get to be around every day, and the work that you guys do and the problem solving that you guys can do. And then it's the actual like narrative writing where I'm like, wait, just tell me again, like just write it down, right? We're having the conversation, just write it down like we're having the conversation, And sometimes that's the Achilles heel. It's like, you've delivered an amazingly designed and engineered and performing building, and it's doing amazing work. And it's like, we just gotta get the plaque on the wall.
Yeah, I think when you first said that, that really stood out to me because I hadn't been thinking about it that way before. I was thinking about, oh, I gotta go find the information on this equipment and my refrigerants and put it all in, and oh, where do I do this? But you're right, like thinking about it from the reviewer has no idea what the project is or what your thought processes have been and why you made the decisions that you did. And the documentation phase is more of a story development, like for them to understand the project and the process and the goals and how you're meeting those goals. I think that would be a really good like mindset switch on our design team end, because you're right, we're used to explaining things to the team, and we write SD narratives all the time, right? But then like, let's translate that into a lead project for the documentation narrative as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for that. I think that'll probably make a big difference for a lot of us on the call. And then, so we're actually getting pretty close to our time. So if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask, keep adding those to the chat. But I'd like to ask you, what are some of the favorite projects that you've been involved in?
So obviously the Barack Environmental Center will always infamously hold a very special place in my heart. It's where I launched my career in
Yeah.
sustainability. It's also the first building that I got to put my name on, so that was pretty
Oh,
cool.
that's
Well, actually, my
exciting.
name was put on it. I didn't sign it, but I didn't like sign the beam, but my name is on that building. But it was also kind of the start of like the conversation around, what does it mean to really be an amazingly impactful building? And I brag on the Barack Center. It's, coming up on its 11th year of life, and it's still performing in that zero space for energy and water. And I'll tell you what was put in that building wasn't the newest whiz technology coming out of the, off the shelf from, the most aggressive and progressive manufacturers. It's all, simple, back to basics, back to understanding building technology and building science. And so every time I get the opportunity to go there, I'm just, I always think about why do we make things so much harder than they need to be? We're in this space of like overcomplicating, and it's like, well, let's get back to the basics. Let's go back to daylight. Let's go back to, thermal bridging, and what are we, how can we use the building as, and in our favor, and and being one with the environment. So that one definitely holds a pretty special place in my heart. Actively, we got a couple of projects at UVA. The Karsh Institute of Democracy is, a favorite because we're piloting with UVA the Design for Freedom standard, which is all focused around eradicating modern day slavery from building materials, which is a total new conversation that we're having that I never knew I was going to get into, but now that I'm here, I can't unsee it. And there's just this idea that we focus on the who occupies the buildings post-construction, but we don't think about how did we get here and who are those people that extracted the raw, earth minerals and metals and goods from for us to be able to have, our tables, our counters, our bookshelves, and what was their quality of life like, and how do we as design professionals impact that conversation and that narrative. So that's really one where I've, stepped out of like, recycled content and EPDs and HPDs, and really leaning more into, their conversations about slave labor and how they're, stepping up to the plate as a manufacturer to combat that. So it's definitely a fun pivot, I'll say, and kind of what we handle in the design space. It's also
that's
very
a new
heavy.
angle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of leaning into that, different design methods and technologies and stuff. What are some new thought processes or technologies that you're really excited about?
One of the ones that I'm really excited about, although I'm not sure how it's going to play out, because maybe I hope I'm not going to be here when these like things happen, but literally circular design, but like really like designing for disassembly, and this idea that as we're putting buildings together, we should be able to take them apart, or that we should be able to put together a manual and a narrative that tells people how to take it apart in a way that members of the building can be used in another life, and thinking about how we design buildings to be connected, especially structurally connected, and how that could, simple changes now could lead to more use and reuse in the future. So it's kind of a weird, like, we're thinking about putting it together, now we need to think about how do we take it apart. So we're piloting it. We're talking about it on one project right now, and how do we think through that? And, we're thinking through even like who owns that process, and like, and who, where does this document, where does all this thought go at the end of the project? Is it a O&M type of item, and how do we infuse as much expertise as we can while we're all still here building it? What do we take pictures of, or, scan and document to help tell that narrative in the future? So you could literally pick it apart limb by limb if you wanted to, and reuse it. So.
And is the thought on that all right, that building's not going to be needed anymore, but let's use its materials to build something else? Or is it like a more negative, like, because we're coastal, right? Like maybe impacts mean that we can't be in this area anymore. We need to move it. That kind of
deconstruct and pack up and retreat a little bit, and move. I mean, part of it, and then like I said, the other part is that if the how many times we've seen a fully built office building be imploded, right? And you're like, man, I bet all of that concrete could have been used for X, or the glass. I'm like, well, I don't know, can that glass be reused? Like, it looks like perfectly good glass to me. Like, what is the rest of its useful life right?
Right. Yeah.
You know, some things it's just like, you know, steel is infinitely recyclable, right? Like you can keep going and going and going with steel. It's not gonna lose anything. So why are we sending, you know, steel goods to the landfill? Like, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's mangled with concrete and we can't get it apart, right? Right. If we don't want it, we can't take that time because it's not cost effective for us to do that, right? So how can we make different design choices, have those conversations, or at least tell somebody, you know, tell the future us, hey, this is how you need to deconstruct it so that you can actually do that. And then I think, you know, we've been talking about LEED a lot, and so I'm like really excited about LEED V5. It's just now on the streets, so they will officially sunset version 4/4.1 that's been in beta, in the next 2 years. So V5 is new, and I'll say from a practitioner's perspective, a little spicy and scary.
Okay.
In that it's changing. You know, LEED has completely done an overhaul. They've done such a good job getting feedback from the marketplace, but they've completely overhauled what it means to be a LEED project, and realigned the goals and expectations of a project, and really included new, even just prerequisites, like you have to do a resiliency study no matter where you are on the globe if you're going to pursue a certification. And that means, you know, looking at your climate analysis and impacts, you know, are we at risk of flooding, fire, hurricanes, tornadoes? You know, what does that look like? And how are we like taking ownership of that as the professionals to ensure that we're being resilient, you know, and thinking about that. Now a whole building life cycle assessment is required, you know, as part of the planning process, right? And that's just been a, you know, point credit, you know, in the rating system. So I'm excited because it's about time that LEED moved on into a new chapter. And, you know, like we've been talking about, so many codes across the country have lifted closer to LEED V4 in the past few years that, you know, they needed some market transformation. So we're excited. I'm excited about that change, but also nervous about the shake it's going to have in the market space of people who are just going to be scared to adopt it and go through that process. So, but they will eventually sunset V4 so that they can get on a 5-year update cycle moving forward, so that they're aligned with like AA 2030 and those kinds of, you know, goals that are more 5, 10, 15-year targets. So yeah, that's also kind of scary for me because it's like 5 years isn't that long. So
no, it's really
some
not.
projects we work on are over 5 years. So yeah, it's a crazy thought, but yeah.
Man. Well, thank you so much. We're already at like a little past 1. I don't want to hold anyone over too long. But thank you so much, Sydney. I think Megan, if you want to share in the chat, like our LinkedIn, you guys can connect to us there. If you didn't get a question answered, I'm sure Sydney would love to connect with you and answer anything that you have. And of course, all of these sessions are recorded and they'll be up on Thompson Consulting Engineers YouTube page. So feel free to go back and rewatch or share it with any of your colleagues that you think would get a lot of use out of this. I think this was a lot of great information from a design team perspective, understanding all of what goes into LEED and how we can make that a more smooth process, and really make sure that we're hitting the owner's needs once we're actually done with a project. And I think before we officially sign off, there anything you'd like to add as a piece of advice for young professionals joining the industry?
Yeah, I would say I just kind of learned this one not too long ago myself, and it's been sticking with me, but run to your boss with problems, just like you do run with them like when you get a new project award or you like achieve something, but run with your problems, you know, to your boss so that they can help you figure it out and you're not sitting and like worrying and sulking and making that worse. I also kind of think to that, like asking questions. I ask questions all the time. I am not a licensed engineer and I'm not a licensed architect and I don't pretend to be. And all of my clients know that. And I am not afraid to ask like, sorry, what does this mean? Because I don't get it. So I think that that's really important. And like also one of the things that I try to impress on my team is always be ready to take notes and bring a notepad. And you know, even if it's a small one, even like sometimes I, you know, forget my notepad, but I've got my notes up in my phone, you know, taking notes constantly and constantly being just an avid learner and continuing to learn, even when you've mastered the fundamentals, really there's always an opportunity. So I've always got my notepad pretty close.
Awesome. Yes, I'm a big note taker too. The people around the office know that for a fact.
Yeah. Definitely got those colleagues who are like, wait till you get back to your office and then call me back so you can take notes. And I'm like, yes, thank you. Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you for your time over your lunch. And I hope that we can see you next time in July. I believe it is the 16th is when our next session will be. So look forward to seeing everybody there.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.